My name was crossed off the family group chat before I even finished reading the message. Removed by Diane. That was it. No explanation, no warning. Just my own mother, deciding in a single tap that I no longer belong. In a conversation about my father's 70th birthday party, I stared at my phone in the parking lot of the hospital where I worked 12-hour shifts to keep a roof over my son's head, and I felt something inside me go very, very quiet. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet, the way a house goes quiet after everyone has left and slammed the door on their way out. I want to tell you what happened after that message, because 3 years later, those same people would show up at my door, smiling like nothing had ever happened, asking me to sign a piece of paper that could save everything they had. And what I did with that pen in my hand is something I still think about every single day. My name is Rachel Monroe. I was 34 years old when my mother removed me from the family chat, and if you had asked me a year before that, I would have told you my family was close. Not perfect, but close. We had Sunday dinners. We had a group photo from every Christmas going back to decades. All of us squeezed onto my parents' porch in matching sweaters my mother insisted on buying. I was the middle child, sandwiched between my older brother Derek, who could do no wrong in my father's eyes, and my younger sister Melissa, who could do no wrong in my mother's eyes. I was just there, reliable, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who drove 2 hours every other weekend to check on my aging parents, bringing groceries, fixing the leaky faucet myself because hiring a plumber felt like an unnecessary expense for people on a nurse's salary. I never asked for recognition. I just wanted to belong. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now, because this story is about to take a turn you will not see coming, and I promise you, the ending will stay with you long after this video is over. The trouble started, as it so often does, with money. My father, Walter, had built a small but successful hardware store chain across 3 counties. The kind of business that doesn't make headlines but quietly supports a family for generations if it's handled right. He was proud of it. He used to say that store was his 4th child, the one that never talked back. When his health started declining, his heart, mostly, years of stress and cheeseburgers catching up to him, the conversations at Sunday dinner shifted from football scores to something heavier. Estate planning, succession, who would take over the stores, who would inherit what. I remember sitting at that table, half listening while cutting up chicken for my son Ethan, when my father said something that I didn't think much of at the time. He said, "Derek's going to run the business. Melissa gets the house when your mother and I are gone. It's already decided." I looked up. Nobody looked at me. Nobody said my name. It was as if I had asked what the weather would be like, and someone had simply answered a different question entirely. I remember laughing a little awkwardly, waiting for someone to say, "And Rachel gets," but the sentence never came. My mother changed the subject to a casserole recipe. My father asked Ethan about school, and that was it. My existence in that room had just been quietly erased, and everyone had agreed to pretend they didn't notice. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself money isn't everything, that I had my own life, my own small apartment, my own son who needed me more than I needed a slice of a hardware store empire. But it wasn't really about the money. It was about the sentence that never included my name. It was about 20 years of showing up, and somehow still being invisible. 6 months later, I found out why it happened at Melissa's engagement party. In my parents' backyard, string lights hung between the oak trees. The same trees I used to climb as a kid. I had brought a gift, a card. I'd spent an hour writing something meaningful in, and Ethan in his good shoes that were already a size too small because I hadn't had the extra money for new ones yet. I walked in, and the conversation didn't stop exactly, but it shifted. Voices dropped half a register. My Aunt Carol looked at me the way people look at someone they've just been gossiping about. My mother hugged me stiffly, the kind of hug that's really just an obligation with arms. Later that night, I overheard my father talking to Derek near the garage, thinking I was inside helping with dishes. "She's not like us," my father said. "She never wanted to be part of the business. She married that man, and after the divorce, she just went off and did her own thing." We can't have someone who wasn't invested making decisions about what we built. I stood frozen behind the door, a stack of dessert plates in my hands, my heart pounding so loud I was sure they could hear it. She never wanted to be part of the business. That sentence rewrote 20 years of my life in real time. I thought about every Saturday I spent stocking shelves at that store as a teenager, unpaid. Because my father said, family doesn't get paid for family. I thought about the summer after my divorce when I moved back in with my parents for months, working the register at the Route 9 location because Derek had a scheduling conflict and someone needed to cover. I thought about all of it, and I realized my own father had rewritten history to make my absence a choice I had made, instead of a door he had quietly closed on me. I didn't say anything that night. I smiled through the rest of the party. I hugged Melissa and told her congratulations, and meant every word of it, because whatever was happening between me and my parents, it wasn't her fault. But something inside me had shifted permanently. I drove home with Ethan asleep in the back seat, and somewhere on that dark highway made a decision. If they didn't want me in the family, fine. I would stop trying to earn a place at a table that had already decided I didn't belong there. I want you to imagine what it feels like to slowly disappear from your own family's story, one quiet exclusion at a time. That's what the next year looked like for me. I wasn't in the group chat anymore. Not after my mother removed me for posting something negative, which was really just me asking gently why I hadn't been told about Dad's cardiologist appointment until after it happened. I stopped being invited to the monthly dinners. When I asked Melissa why, she said, sounding almost embarrassed, "Mom just said it'd be smaller this time." Smaller meant everyone except me. I threw myself into work. I picked up extra shifts at the hospital. I started taking Ethan to the park more, cooking elaborate dinners just for the two of us, building a small, quiet life that didn't depend on people who had already decided I wasn't worth including. Some nights I cried in the shower so Ethan wouldn't hear me. Some nights I didn't cry at all, and that scared me more, because it meant a part of me was starting to accept that this was just how things were going to be. And then, about a year after Melissa's engagement party, my father had a second heart attack. A bad one. I found out from an aunt, not from my mother, not from either of my siblings. I found out through a Facebook post from a cousin, 3 days after it happened, saying she was praying for Uncle Walter's recovery. 3 days. My father had nearly died, and I found out through a Facebook post from someone I hadn't spoken to in years. I drove to the hospital that same night, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. When I walked into the ICU waiting room, Mother's face did something complicated, surprise, and something that looked almost like guilt, quickly replaced by a kind of cold composure. "You didn't need to come," she said. 4 words. That's what she said to me after her husband, my father, had nearly died. "You didn't need to come." I sat in that waiting room anyway, in a chair in the corner, while Derek paced and made calls to insurance companies, and Melissa cried into her fiance's shoulder, and my mother sat perfectly still, staring at a wall like she was trying to hold the entire family together with sheer force of will. Nobody spoke to me for almost 3 hours. I brought coffee for everyone anyway. Nobody thanked me. I sat there thinking about all the times I had shown up, and how showing up had apparently never once counted for anything in this family's math. My father survived that night, weaker, but alive. And for a few weeks after, something almost like softness crept back into how my mother spoke to me. She added me back to the group chat. She asked how Ethan was doing at school. For a brief, foolish moment, I let myself hope that this scare had shaken something loose in them, some recognition of what actually mattered. I should have known better. 3 weeks after my father came home from the hospital, my mother called me, and her voice had a strange, businesslike edge to it that I hadn't heard before. "Rachel," she said, "we need you to come by the house this weekend. There's something with the store's paperwork that requires your signature." I remember standing in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "My signature? On what?" "It's complicated," she said. "Your father's lawyer will explain it when you get here. Just, please come. It's important." I want you to sit with that for a second, because I certainly did. For over a year, I had been erased from that family's decisions. removed from chats, uninvited from dinners, told to my face that I never wanted to be part of the business, and now, suddenly, out of nowhere, they needed my signature on something urgent enough that my mother's voice was shaking as she asked for it. If you've ever felt like people only remember you when they need something from you, take a breath, because what I found out that weekend is going to make your blood boil, and then it is going to make you want to stand up and cheer. I almost didn't go. I stood in my kitchen for a long time after that phone call, staring at the fridge covered in Ethan's drawings, thinking about all the ways I could simply say no and hang up the phone forever on that entire chapter of my life. But there was a part of me, the same part that had spent 20 years hoping to finally be seen, that needed to know what this was about. Not because I wanted back in, but because I needed to understand exactly what kind of leverage they thought they had over me, and exactly what kind of trap I might be walking into. I drove to my parents' house that Saturday with a strange, steady calm that surprised even me. Ethan stayed with a friend for a sleepover, which felt right, somehow. Whatever was about to happen, I didn't want him anywhere near it. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed an unfamiliar car parked behind Derek's truck, sleek and dark. The kind of car that belonged to someone who charged $400 an hour inside. The dining room table, the same table where I'd once been told my future was already decided, without me, had been turned into a makeshift office. Papers everywhere. A man in a gray suit, who introduced himself as Mr. Halloran, my father's attorney. My mother sat rigid at the head of the table, my father in a wheelchair beside her, looking smaller than I remembered, older, the heart attack having carved something out of him that hadn't grown back. Derek stood near the window, arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. Melissa sat twisting a napkin in her lap, looking like she might be sick. "Thank you for coming, Rachel," my mother said, her voice unnervingly polite. The way people speak when they're trying very hard to keep something from falling apart. "Please, sit down." I sat. Mr. Halloran cleared his throat and began explaining, in the careful, over-articulated way that lawyers speak when they know the news isn't good. And what he told me changed absolutely everything I thought I understood about my family. 12 years earlier, when my father first incorporated the hardware store chain into a family trust to protect it from liability and reduce estate taxes, he had structured the ownership in a very particular way. The trust required that any major decision, a sale, refinancing, a transfer of ownership, anything involving significant debt against store assets, required unanimous written consent from all named beneficiaries of the trust. Not majority consent. Unanimous. And here is the part that made the room go completely silent. I was still listed as a beneficiary. I had never been removed. Not because my father had forgotten to remove me, Mr. Halloran explained carefully, avoiding eye contact with anyone else at the table, but because doing so legally would have required my signed consent to be removed, the same unanimous consent clause that protected the trust from being altered by any single person acting alone, in trying to protect the business from being controlled by one greedy family member. My father had accidentally protected my place in it forever. Whether he liked it or not, Derek, it turned out, had spent the last 18 months secretly taking out loans against 2 of the store locations to fund a separate business venture of his own, a chain of specialty fitness stores that had failed spectacularly, burning through nearly $600,000 that Derek had quietly borrowed against the family trust's assets, assuming, apparently, that he would pay it back before anyone noticed. He hadn't been able to pay it back, and now the bank was calling in the loans, threatening to force the sale of 2 hardware store locations, the same locations my father had built with his own hands over 30 years, unless the family could restructure the debt through a new refinancing agreement, which required unanimous consent, which required my signature. I sat absorbing this, watching Derek's jaw tighten as the truth came out in front of everyone, including our parents. My mother's face had gone pale. My father, weak as he was, looked at Derek with an expression I had never seen on him before. Not anger exactly, but something closer to grief. The specific grief of realizing the son you built your entire legacy around had nearly burned it to the ground behind your back. So let me understand this correctly, I said slowly, my voice steadier than I expected it to be. For the last year, I wasn't good enough to be in the family group chat. I wasn't good enough to know Dad had a heart attack until 3 days after it happened. I wasn't good enough to be told about a decision, made at this very table, about who would run a business I spent my teenage years working in for free. But now, because Derek gambled away $600,000 of the family's assets, suddenly my signature is the only thing standing between this family and losing everything my father built. Nobody answered. Mr. Halloran shuffled his papers, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. Melissa was crying quietly now. My mother opened her mouth, then closed it again. Rachel, my father finally said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it, but somehow more honest than it had been in years. I was wrong. I've been wrong about a lot of things. Please, whatever you think of us, right now, and you have every right to think it. Please don't let this business die. Because of my mistakes, I want to tell you that I felt vindicated in that moment. That some deep, satisfying wave of justice washed over me. But honestly, what I felt was something more complicated. I felt the weight of 20 years of being overlooked crashing into the reality that this business, this store that smelled like sawdust and motor oil, where I had learned to use a cash register when I was 14, genuinely mattered to me too, even after everything. It wasn't just theirs. It had never just been theirs. I had built something into that place too. Even if nobody had ever bothered to acknowledge it. I picked up the pen. Everyone in that room held their breath, waiting to see whether I would sign the papers that would save them, or whether I would finally, after everything, walk away and let them face the consequences of a mess I had no part in creating. I set the pen down without signing anything. I have conditions, I said. You could have heard a pin drop in that dining room. I laid out exactly what I needed before I would agree to sign anything. Full transparency on the trust's finances going forward. An equal seat at the table for every major business decision from that point on. Not as a courtesy, but as a legal right already written into the trust that they had simply chosen to ignore. And this part mattered to me more than I expected it to. A real, honest conversation, not just for me, but in front of Ethan, someday, about why I had been treated the way I had been treated. I wasn't asking for revenge. I was asking for the truth to finally exist in the open, instead of buried under 20 years of polite silence. My father agreed before my mother even had a chance to speak. Derek, humiliated and cornered, agreed too, because he had no other choice. The alternative was losing everything, including whatever fragile relationship he still had with our father. Mr. Halloran redrew the paperwork that same week, and 3 days later, I sat at that same dining room table and signed my name, not as the daughter who had been left out, but as an equal partner with a legal right to be there, a right that had apparently been mine all along, hiding in plain sight in a stack of documents nobody had bothered to explain to me. The months that followed weren't a fairy tale. My mother and I are still working through years of hurt that don't just disappear because a lawyer forced the truth into the open. Derek and I have had exactly one honest conversation about what he did, and it wasn't easy, and I'm not sure it fixed everything, but it was a start. Neither of us had before. What did change permanently was this. I stopped being invisible. I sit at every meeting now. I have a say in every decision. 2 years later, that little hardware store chain my father built is not only saved, but stronger than it's ever been, in part because I brought fresh ideas to the table that Derek's failed venture had ironically inspired me to research. Smarter inventory systems, an online ordering platform that doubled our revenue in 18 months. Turns out the daughter, who never wanted to be part of the business, had been paying closer attention than anyone gave her credit for. Last month, my father asked me to help him plan the company's 35th anniversary celebration. He wants my name on the banner this time, right next to his. Not because the trust requires it, because he asked for it himself. If there's one thing I want you to take from my story, it's this: the people who overlook you today may need you more than they'll ever admit tomorrow. And when that day comes, you don't owe anyone your silence, your forgiveness, or your signature till you've decided exactly what you're worth. Don't let anyone rewrite your history to make your exclusion look like your choice. Stand in your truth, even when it's quiet, even when nobody's clapping for you yet. Because sometimes the very thing they tried to erase you from is the thing that ends up needing you the most. If this story moved you even a little, let me know in the comments. Have you ever felt invisible in your own family, only to be needed later on your own terms? I read every single comment, and I promise you, your story matters just as much as this one. And if you want more real, raw, emotional stories like this one, hit that subscribe button. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. And I will see you in the next story, here on Legacy Whisper.